MCU is a masterpiece of brand recognition. With the Avengers franchise, Marvel Studios perfected a reliable formula of action comedy storytelling and interconnected character arcs, creating a shared universe that other studios quickly attempted to copy. Commercially speaking, this was a massive success. The downside is that, with a few exceptions like Black Panther and Thor Ragnarok, the MCU rarely makes ambitious creative choices. This problem covers everything from visual style to political themes, but today we're obviously going to talk about costume design, specifically superhero costumes.
It's about damn time.
The MCU's costumes are pretty conservative, using similar silhouettes and colour palettes to build a shared company style. This helps to create a cohesive aesthetic during crossover movies, but it also detracts from the personality of these characters. And as the franchise wears on, this problem becomes more and more noticeable. Hi there, I'm Gavia Baker-Whitelaw and this is Behind the Scenes, decoding the world of costume design. Marvel Comics display a wide range of artistic styles, especially over the past 30 years or so. Headline titles like The Avengers and Spider-Man typically follow a more traditional style, but there are plenty of Marvel comics with more distinctive looks. For instance, Kamala Khan's introductory comic featured expressive comedic art from Adrian Alphona, fitting in with Ms. Marvel's role as a funny, relatable teenager who can change the shape and size of her body, a visually evocative superpower. David Aja and Matt Fraction's acclaimed Hawkeye series used the character's purple colour palette to create a stylised new view of Hawkeye, feeding into the depressive, down-to-earth tone of the story while using target imagery to emphasise the character's role as an archer. And the 2016 reboot of Power Man and Iron Fist has a lot of fun with the physicality of its two leads, with artist Sanford Green exaggerating the size difference between Luke Cage and Danny Rand. There are dozens of other examples, and if you go back through Marvel history, you'll find game-changing work by iconic artists like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. But for the most part, this kind of visual flair is missing from the MCU's costumes, camera work, and production design. This isn't to say that the MCU's costumes are actively bad. There are plenty of smart details I enjoy, like the way Captain America and the Winter Soldier's outfits evolve alongside their shared story. I also think the Captain Marvel movie did a great job of transferring the character's iconic costume to the screen, although this scene is an unintentional metaphor for how the MCU tones down the more distinctive visual elements of the comics.
Definitely not.
On the whole, Marvel films can look rather samey. They echo the conservative expectations of modern American blockbusters. The first phase of the MCU set the tone for things to come. From 2008 to 2011, Marvel introduced the building blocks for the first Avengers team. With the exception of Thor, the main characters are all tied into the American military-industrial complex. Iron Man wears his own robotic armour, while Hawkeye, Black Widow and Captain America all wear costumes manufactured by S.H.I.E.L.D., a government agency. The Hulk, for obvious reasons, doesn't have a costume. Captain America's outfit is the most colourful and fun, with an origin story of its own. His first costume was a stage outfit designed for patriotic propaganda in the 1940s, and his new outfit was redesigned by a Captain America fanboy, Agent Coulson.
I had some ideas about the uniform.
Whatever you want, pal.
This explains why he looks like a classic, brightly coloured comic book character in The Avengers. Meanwhile, Black Widow and Hawkeye are more subdued. The franchise gets rid of Hawkeye's circus backstory and emphasises his role as a grim action hero, basically just putting him in a bulletproof vest. Later on, we meet more Avengers like Ant-Man and the Falcon. They too have a subdued colour palette, with Captain America losing his bright colours in the sequels. By Avengers Endgame, we have an extensive supporting cast of characters wearing a similar colour scheme, silhouette and reinforced fabrics that resemble Kevlar. In group scenes, everything is toned down to muted shades of brown and grey. As I explained in my video on the history of the Batsuit, classic superhero costumes were inspired by circus acrobats and strongmen. Early superhero comics were absurd and fantastical, allowing readers to suspend their disbelief about why these heroes dress up in colourful costumes to fight crime. The whole aesthetic is based around the contrast between bright shades of red, blue and yellow ink. Those costumes were designed to catch the eye. If a superhero movie takes place in a more stylized setting, like Suicide Squad or Batman and Robin, it still feels natural for the main characters to wear theatrical outfits. But the MCU basically takes place in the real world. The Avengers franchise features dozens of scenes in realistic urban settings, featuring relatable characters in normal clothes. When those characters put on superhero costumes, we need an in-universe explanation for why they're doing it and where that costume came from. That's why the MCU's costumes look practical and remove the more stylized and colourful elements we see in the comics.
I would explain the rigidity-flexibility ratio, which, gotta say, that's awesome.
Now, obviously there are some exceptions. The Thor franchise originates on a Viking fantasy planet, and Guardians of the Galaxy is much more colourful than the Avengers movies. There are several MCU films with genuinely distinctive visual styles, like Black Panther, Thor Ragnarok, and the 1940s pastiche of Captain America: The First Avenger. Taking inspiration from the comics, these films really consider how costumes and production design can play into a film's tone and world building. For instance, costume designer Ruth Carter created beautiful and well-researched looks for the Wakandan characters in Black Panther, with far more personality than we see elsewhere in the MCU. And Doctor Strange echoed the psychedelic imagery of the comics, although to be honest, it's otherwise a below-average fantasy blockbuster. You've probably noticed that the MCU's most visually interesting spin-offs are fantasy movies, while the traditional superhero films are more conservative. For superhero stories set in modern-day America, the MCU features a lot of grey cityscapes, glossy minimalist offices, labs, and military compounds. And when those spin-offs come together for crossovers like Avengers Endgame, the costumes and colours immediately become more subdued. These crossover movies require a shared visual style, so the heroes can look like they come from the same universe. That's very different from the comics, where we're used to seeing the same characters look radically different depending on which artist is in charge. In superhero movie fandom, the MCU is generally perceived as being lighter, more colourful, and more comedic than DC movies. But that's only partially true. While recent Batman films are dark and gritty, the DC franchise includes a pretty wide range of tones and aesthetics. And while the MCU has a very recognisable action comedy tone, it's not especially colourful or cartoonish. The prevailing colour of the Avengers movies is actually grey. The last two phases of the MCU feed into team-up movies directed by the Russo brothers, a pair of filmmakers with a rather nondescript style. The most visually memorable moments in films like Avengers: Infinity War are echoes of other people's movies, like Guardians of the Galaxy. Otherwise, the big Avengers films have a muted colour scheme, flat lighting, and overcrowded CGI action sequences without much visual contrast. They lack the aesthetic panache of blockbusters like Star Wars, Pacific Rim, and Mad Max Fury Road. In terms of costume design, this explains why characters like Scarlet Witch and Hawkeye barely resemble their classic comic book designs. These heroes have to fit together on screen, and Marvel's solution is to give all their costumes grey undertones and similar fabrics. It kind of looks like they all shop at the same store, creating a cohesive brand. And that's how you end up with a costume reveal, like Scarlet Witch's makeover at the end of WandaVision. WandaVision is one of the more visually striking MCU spin-offs, riffing on classic sitcoms and putting the main characters in a variety of wild outfits. But when the story concludes, and Wanda embraces her new role as the Scarlet Witch, her new costume is, well, kind of dull.
Say, that's some kind of getup you're wearing.
It's a dark shade of maroon, filmed outdoors in greyish light, and it ultimately looks similar to her old costume, and to Hawkeye's body armour, and to the textured figure-hugging outfits worn by Gamora and Black Widow. The only fresh element is the headpiece, and it's less fantastical than the costumes we see in the Thor franchise. It's also much less exciting than Scarlet Witch's costumes in the comics, dialing back the drama of her magical witch persona. Over the next few years, the MCU will shift away from the militaristic Avengers era and introduce more fantastical characters. Among the upcoming spin-offs, we have 3 more fantasy films, a martial arts movie, and a Blade reboot, which will introduce vampires to the MCU. This gives Marvel plenty of opportunities for more ambitious visual storytelling, including more interesting costumes. But will that actually happen? We can only hope. Thanks for watching Behind the Scenes. What classic Marvel Comics costume would you like to see on screen? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.